How mitakuyapi. Chante washte napchiyu zapelo. Tyrel ishtamaza amachiapi elo. Ihem waslanha hamataha na akichita hanskan elwatilo. Itoapi wachu wichasha na oyate wapasi wichasha hemachalo. My name is Tyrel Ironized. I come from the Standing Rock Sioux Nation, more specifically Long Soldier. I am a photographer and an anthropologist, and I greet you with a firm handshake and a good heart. I translated that out of order. I apologize. I'm not used to having to translate that. I was asked to come here and speak, or to record this video and speak rather, for Indigenous Peoples Day. I apologize if my eyes are kind of shifty and I look around a lot. It's because it's really weird just to fix yourself with a stare and speak. I'm not used to doing that. Normally I have a crowd that I'm talking to, and I'm a lot more comfortable with that, oddly enough. Also, I apologize for this and this up here. My mic is situated right there, and this is the only way I can hear myself. This is just so that I don't blow out your eardrums whenever I speak. So, like I said, I was invited, asked to speak at this event because I'm involved with Lakota language revitalization. And I say involved with because it's what I've done for the last couple of years, and I grew up in the education system on the reservation that pushed for Lakota language revitalization. I don't know what the state is currently, but when I was a kid, there was a push to get speakers, to produce language speakers. In elementary school, I learned names of animals and colors and how to introduce myself, and that was about it. We just reinforced that over and over and over. And then in middle school was kind of when we started to expand the vocabulary and start to build sentences. And in high school, we were supposed to continue to build on that and build even better sentences, more fluent sounding sentences. I should preface this with, I am by no means fluent. I am still learning, and I will continue to learn for the rest of my life, because regrettably, Lakota is not my first fluent tongue. It is my native tongue. It is the language of my people and my ancestors, but it is not the language that I know fluently. The last 2-3 years, I've had the fantastic opportunity to work with the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe's Language and Culture Institute with their Dakota Lakota Summer Institute, or DLSI for short. I've been an intern. I've just kind of been a runner and helped wherever I could with it. It's a great opportunity. It's a great summer program because it's very grassroots. It's based on Standing Rock, and it's from people from Standing Rock. While I was there, I actually got to reconnect with my middle school language teacher, Gabe Blackmoon, Wisapa. He is the one who taught me most of what I know about the language, and he was a fluent speaker. He was one of the driving forces of Lakota language revitalization on Standing Rock, along with Unchi Dolores Taken Alive, both of whom have passed sadly this year. It's been a tough year for language revitalization. We have also had Lala Richard Ramsey, who would show up at DLSI and a lot of other events to speak Dakota. He also walked on this year. I suppose I should talk about the difference in the languages real quick. So we have 3 dialects in the Ocheti Shakoi, or what is more popularly known as Sioux. I'm going to call them the Ocheti Shakoi because that's our autonym, that's our name for ourselves. So on one side we have the Tituan, the dwellers on the plains, kind of our archaic name now. Today we call them Lakota, and they speak one dialect, the Lakota dialect, the El dialect. And on the other side you have Isanti, or Dakota. I always accidentally throw the guttural in there. And they're different because they don't have the guttural noises. They don't have the like in the Jota or Shunghila, they don't have that noise. Theirs is a little bit more friendly to like newer speakers because of that. A lot of people struggle with like that. It's called the velar fricative. A lot of people struggle with that sound. So the Isanti, Dakota do not have that. And then in the middle, you have what is usually called Yankton, or Ihanktawan. And I've heard different people's opinions on what they are classified as, what their dialect is called, more specifically. Because Lakota is L, Dakota is D, and then we have this middle dialect that is sometimes called Dakota, which is different from Dakota because Dakota has the guttural noises, but it's still different from Lakota because Lakota doesn't have a D. They don't use the letter D at all, whereas Dakota does. They don't use the letter L, but they have the velar fricatives like the L dialect. Other people call it Nakota or Nakota, and I've heard arguments for both. I've heard people say one or the other. On Standing Rock, the speakers of that language call it Dakota. They don't call it Nakota. But I've met people from Yankton Reservation who call it Nakota. That's not for me to decide. My family, I come from the Blackfoot bands and the Hunkpapa bands of Lakota, as well as the Ihanktawan Dakota, Yanktone Dakota. We call ourselves Ihanktawana Dakota, so that's how I've always referred to it. I speak Lakota. I understand way more Lakota than I speak, and I read a lot better than I speak it. That's not to say that I'm not trying, but this education system that I had taught me that part better than like the actual speaking. I have pronunciation down. I can do that just fine. It's just like actually stringing together sentences and everything like that is kind of where my knowledge starts to fall short. But I'm working on it because the language is important to me. The language is important to our people. And before I go any further, I'm not saying that you can't be Lakota if you don't know the language. You are 100% still Lakota if you can't speak it. Like that argument is detrimental to Lakota language revitalization efforts in my mind. Also, when I say Lakota, I am like Lakota language. I am speaking about all three dialects. It's not just one. It is important to revive all three dialects of the language, and it's even more important or just as important, to preserve the smaller dialects within the bigger dialect. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But our language, the reason I'm so passionate about it and so adamant that we learn it and learn it well is that our language is more than just how we communicate. A lot of people who speak languages that are still like thriving and alive and well kind of take for granted what language does for them. They see it pretty much exclusively as like a way to communicate with other people, and they don't look into it any deeper than that. Whereas after years of genocidal campaigns by the U.S. government, our language is slowly like dwindling. And one, it's just sad that like a language would be lost, but even more important than that, I think, is that our language dictates how we view the world. Our language shapes how we see everything around us. the sentence structure of Lakota, the way we form like just thoughts is so different from English or German or Spanish. I once had an elder tell me that even though they were in the military and like they learned German while they were overseas, they don't think they speak German, but they don't think it, and they don't speak it out loud if they don't have to, because they don't want to think like a German. They want to think like a Lakota. And going back to DLSI, when I worked there a few summers ago, part of my like job duties were to go and assist in like this daycare facility, and like the daycare is only available during the summer. Normally during like the academic year, the daycare operates as the Lakota immersion nest or language nest, and it takes small kids. I don't know ages, like first grade and under, and I don't know like where like the bottom cutoff is, but it takes these kids and it puts them in an environment where they only hear Lakota. It's Lakota elders and Lakota, like more proficient Lakota language learners that are taking care of these kids and teaching them. And so these kids go throughout their entire day and they only hear Lakota. That rule becomes more relaxed in the summer, which is when I interact with these kids. And so like they were allowed to use English and we were allowed to use English, which I was grateful for because I don't speak Lakota well enough to communicate with these kids. I was like playing catch up compared to them. And I remember there was a little girl who asked me why I was being so tall one day. And at first I just wrote it off as a kid like learning language and just getting a grasp on it and not quite understanding how certain words are supposed to be used. And I started to think about how we as Lakota people, how the Lakota language structures its sentences. And what in English we would consider adverbs, or adjectives rather, just descriptors, where you would say you're very tall, like tall is a descriptor of me. In Lakota, that has to be conjugated with a verb. And so being was the verb. And so for her to ask this question in this kind of weird way, and from an English standpoint, it dawned on me that she's not thinking in English. She had to translate from Lakota into an English phrase in order to like ask me a question. And that kind of reshaped how I look at like the language. Because like before I was still passionate about it, but it was more so because it was almost lost. And it's our language. Like that was the extent of my understanding of it. But after this, I kind of realized that if we lose the Lakota language, we lose part of a Lakota worldview. Like that's how we've seen the world around us and how we interact with the world around us is through our language. And I mentioned earlier about like the dialects. And so there's the three big ones, Lakota, Yankton, and Isanti. But even within those, you have like smaller dialects. The Lakota that I speak, being from Standing Rock, is not the same Lakota that someone from Pine Ridge or Rosebud will speak. And the Dakota that I know from Standing Rock is not the same Dakota that is being spoken on Yankton Res or Crow Creek. There's different vocabulary and different like thoughts that go into it. And I think that that's just as important to preserve as like the greater dialect. And there's a push to kind of standardize Lakota as a language, which I understand. It makes it a lot easier to teach. But I can't help but wonder if we lose part of band identity or who individual like Tioshpa is, individual families, individual like groups are. with that standardization? It's a question that there's no real easy answer to, but it's an important question to consider in like the topics of language revitalization. And even though I'm speaking directly about Lakota and Dakota, this goes for all languages, all indigenous languages that are still being spoken. Like, they're important to preserve because they're preserved within the language. Not even just to preserve, like they need to be revitalized and spoken and become commonly heard languages, because there's whole worldviews contained within the language. And if we lose that, we lose part of who we are. Like, that's not to say that if the Lakota language disappears that there will be no more Lakota, but there'll be a part of us that we'd have to try and recreate or find a new way to get in touch with. I had a mentor. He doesn't like to be called an elder. He considers himself too young for it. But Lekshi John Eagle back home, who once told me, and he told me who told him this, and I wish I could remember, because it's important to cite where you learn things from. It's important to credit the people who taught you. But Lekshi John once told me, don't make anything more or less than what it needs to be. Nothing should be more or less than what it should be. And with language revitalization, I feel like that rings true more than a lot of other places. Because although our language is important to us, that doesn't mean that we always say our language is sacred, which it is. Our language is our worldview, as I've said many times over and will continue to say. But that doesn't mean that we should only speak our language in ceremonial contexts or in formal contexts. Our language should not be only used for special occasions. We should be able to speak our language wherever, which is why I make a conscious effort to speak Lakota outside of just these contexts where I'm asked to speak. But that also doesn't mean that it should be reduced to just communication, because it's still more than that. You have to find that middle ground between like revering our language and treating it with the respect that it deserves, but also not elevating it to this like exotic status where we can't speak it in day-to-day life. It's a weird road to try and walk, because you go too far one way and language revitalization starts to fall apart, and you go too far the other way and the same thing. It's a discussion I see a lot from the people that I like learn from, and I learn from other language learners and as well as fluent speakers. Tahashi Ray Taken Alive and Tahashi Alex Fire Thunder, both of whom I've learned a lot from. Alex has the Hoyeya podcast, and I know I sound like I'm plugging a lot of different things, but I figure if I have this space, I want to promote language revitalization as much as possible. And Hoyeya is a great opportunity. It's a great resource for language learning. I'm coming up on my time, and I wish I had like a better way to wrap this up. But language is how we view the world. It's more than just how we communicate with each other. And so with that in mind, I encourage you to go and learn your indigenous language, or help others learn the language of whatever land you happen to be on, whoever's territory you are currently occupying. Learn at least a few phrases in that language if you can. And with that is my time. Only the earth lives forever. Toksha ke wanchiyan kinkte. I'll see you again. And I believe there's a panel, a forum after this where you can come and ask questions. Toksha.